by Meir Kahane and Dennis Prager. And I think you'll find the issue one that will be stimulating. I think you'll find the controversy is going to be there because Dennis Prager is a man who disagrees with Rabbi Meir Kahane. That's why they're here. Why would your brand of politics, where you want to kick them all out and you don't care what happens to them, just so they leave Israel and the occupied territories, why would your brand of politics gain popularity in Israel?
Because the people of Israel, and especially the Sephardic Jews of Israel, the Jews who came from Arab countries, didn't learn about Arabs in seminars on the West Coast or the East Coast. They lived with Arabs. They come from Arab countries. They know what it means to have lived under Arabs, and they never again want to. There was a funeral yesterday of a Jew who was murdered. He's the fourth Jew murdered in a month. The people of Israel, the ordinary people, are frightened. They're troubled. They understand that there is a very, very serious problem. The problem is that the Arabs who live inside Israel hate Israel. And they understand that Israel is a Jewish state and that the Arabs are not Jewish. So I have an answer. No one else has an answer.
Where does your policy differ, other than, doing away with them in a concerted campaign, for what Hitler did to the Jews?
That is, if you really mean that question, if you don't mean to ask it as a provocative question, but if you really mean it, I'm astounded. The Jews of Germany never ever said, this country is really ours. The Germans stole it from us. And when we become the majority, we'll take it back and call it Israel. The German Jews wanted nothing more than to be the best German that ever lived. The Arabs don't want to be Jews or Israelis. The Arabs say, the Jews stole this country from us. We were the majority once. We want this country back. When we have it back, it'll be Palestine. And if anyone in this room thinks that there's one Arab in Israel who would rather live in a country which is legally defined as the Jewish state, he has greater contempt for the Arabs than I thought that even liberals could have.
How do you square Israeli society and democracy? Do you want to do away with what is known as the only democracy in that part of the world?
Well, first of all, anyone who has a modicum of intelligence knows that a basic contradiction between Zionism and Western democracy. Zionism came into being to create a Jewish state. Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, wrote a book which is called The Jewish State. A Jewish state at the very minimum. The minimal definition means a state with a majority of Jews, because only in that way can Jews solve their own destiny, be masters of their own fate.
Good to be with you, Ray. Dennis, you deal with this on a program called Religion on the Line. You are Jewish. How do you feel about Rabbi Meir Kahane?
Well, the reason that I agreed to appear this evening, because this is not the normal sort of thing. I don't like to engage in polemics and debate as a rule. But I'd like to defend Judaism from the smear campaign that Meir Kahane has perpetrated against it. And I really feel, as the defender this evening of Judaism, against some of the things that he said. It's remarkable, had an Arab member of the PLO sat here and said that Zionism and democracy are mutually contradictory ideas, he would have been called an anti-Semite. In fact, a lot of the things that Meir Kahane says would render him anti-Semitic. He is an echo, tragically, a tragic echo, produced to a large extent by the Holocaust and by the Arab desire to destroy Israel. He is a classic product of Jews being hated for all these centuries, and he has incorporated a mirror image of the non-Jew in his psyche. And that is really what we're dealing with. He feels non-Jews hate him. And his answer to Arafat is to be the Jewish Arafat. It's very interesting, Ray. You asked him, and he dismissed it as a lunacy. You asked him what really differentiates Meir Kahane's attitude to Arabs from Hitler's to German Jews. And he didn't answer you, because the fact is, as I see, the difference is minimal. What he did say was that Jews in Germany were nicer and more patriotic than Arabs are in Israel, which may or may not be the case, but he didn't answer at all what differentiates him from Hitler. He answered what differentiates Jews in Germany from Arabs in Israel. And it was very interesting that it wasn't pursued because it was a nice evasion of the question. And I, as a rule, loathe when the left call people fascists. I tend to find myself on the conservative side of the spectrum theologically and politically. But when you do have a bona fide fascist, and I don't mean that as a dirty word, I mean by any normative definition of fascism, this is a Jewish fascist. It's a tragedy. It is a tragedy that he cites that he is rooted in Judaism when there isn't anything normatively in Judaism, Orthodox, conservative, or Reform, that supports him. He is condemned by the major Orthodox rabbis of Israel. His appeal is to those who suffered under Arabs, namely Arab Sephardi Jews.
Dennis, how do you account?
Certainly understandable, undoubtedly sad, and one could cry over the fact that there is some popularity to someone who has such views when the Torah that he blasphemes constantly instructs the Jew to love the stranger as the stranger, because Jews themselves were strangers in Egypt and know how it feels to be one.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, you can have at each other. And in Meir Kahane, you can have the first word. So stand by, we'll be right back. You heard Dennis Prager, and he wasn't very kind.
No, I think that people who can't debate will usually defame. I think that there are two terrible things in this world. One is ignorance, and the other is arrogance. And the arrogance of ignorance is the most incredible of all things. If Mr. Craig were a rabbi and a scholar, which he isn't, he wouldn't have made that absurd comment about what the Torah stands for and what it believes in terms of Judaism. Let me teach you a lesson in Torah. In last week's portion of the week, it spoke about a Jewish king. And it said, and I'm quoting the Hebrew for just the moment because it's important. Som tasim alecha melech, which in English is translated usually as, thou shalt surely place for thyself a king from thy brethren and not a stranger. Meaning a non-Jew cannot be a king in Israel. The Talmud in Yevamot, you can take these notes because it's probably the first time you've ever seen it, states, why does it use the word som tasim, which in Hebrew is a redundant phrase, thou shalt surely. It says, any appointment of authority in Israel shall only be Jewish. That's not democracy. It's brought down as Jewish law in the Ramban, in Maimonides, who is often quoted as a progressive Jewish thinker, in which he states clearly that no non-Jew shall ever be appointed over a Jew, even as a clerk concerning the water carriers.
Rabbi,
Now that is listed. Excuse me, no. I'm going to finish this.
All right.
That's listed in the Laws of Kings, chapter 1. You can take that down too. Judaism is not democracy, and only an ignoramus who hasn't learned it will make that statement that it is. Judaism states quite clearly that the Jews, when they create a Jewish state, will not grant citizenship to a non-Jew, but at most he shall be a gil toshav, a resident stranger. And when Mr. Prager quotes the verse about being kind to the stranger, he may not know, and probably doesn't know, since he isn't a scholar, that any time it uses the word strange, which in Hebrew is ger, the rabbis state clearly that refers to a ger, to a convert, to a non-Jew who has become a Jew, who has converted to Judaism. Now that's what the Talmud says when it states 48 times does the Torah states that thou shalt love the stranger, and it refers to a Gentile who has converted to Judaism.
All right, Dennis?
Yeah. All right. First of all, with regard to defamation, it's the arrogance and ignorance charge was obviously projection, since the only adjective I used in my first comments was fascist.
Only.
The only. But you have not denied it, and as you know, even us non-scholars know the famous Talmudic statement, Shtika Hoda'ah, that silence is agreement. And I didn't interrupt you, and I would appreciate the same. After being called arrogant, ignorant, and defaming, and my comments is absurd, it is very hard for the rabbi to claim that he knows how to debate. But quite aside from all of that, I will leave it to the logic rather than the distorted scholarship of Rabbi Kahane, who I repeat has been negated by the following, who are the leading Orthodox rabbis in Israel: Reb Aharon Lichtenstein, Rav Shach, and even Menachem Begin has condemned the tactics of the so-called rabbi. So while I do not claim to be a scholar, though I must say...
Wait a minute, I have to stop you right there, Dennis.
Yeah.
The so-called, are you suggesting he's not a rabbi?
No, he is a rabbi,
Okay.
but you see, rabbi, just for the listener's interest, I don't know what constitutes a scholar. My book on Judaism is the most widely used text introducing Judaism in the English-speaking language. And my book on the history of anti-Semitism is equally highly regarded. I would love to know what the rabbi has written in the area of scholarship outside of perhaps his hate-mongering books he considers to be scholarly. That's debatable. Be that as it may, I leave it to the logic of your listening audience, since I don't think that they have delved into Maimonides. It says in the Bible, love the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt. And unless you translate the word stranger as convert, the Jews did not convert to Egyptian religion, and it is a distorted commentary.
I hope now that we can stay away from all the scripture.
It is an ongoing problem that some Jews, very few but enough, like Rabbi Kahane, thrive on being hated. And if the Arabs would, in his view, God forbid, be what he calls good Arabs, this would put him in a terrible, terrible bind, because he basically is a mirror image of Arafat. But I do have one final thing to say here. All this being said, and all my attacks on Rabbi Kahane notwithstanding, it is very important that non-Jews and Jews understand a moral difference between the Jewish world and the Arab world. Rabbi Kahane is by and large considered submoral in the Jewish world. He is considered an immoral aberration. His mirror image, however, in the Arab world, Yasser Arafat, is a hero.
The fact of the matter is that wasn't the question that I asked Dennis Prager. The question was, assuming that the Arabs would become a majority, what would Dennis Prager say? Do they have the right? And don't say it can't happen. We can argue figures from now until tomorrow. I can tell you that the Galilee today is the majority of Arabs, and that's a fact. I can tell you that Wadi Ara, that area which is in the heartland of Israel today, is the majority of Arabs. I can tell you that the Sephardic birth rate has fallen far, far more drastically than that of the Arabs. I can tell you that the only reason why the Arabs are only 17% is because there was such a mass emigration of Jews from Arab countries in the early years of the state. I can tell you that more Jews are now leaving Israel than entering it. So therefore, why don't you answer the simple question, assuming, give me a hypothetical answer to a hypothetical question. Would you say that if the Arabs did become the majority, that they had an absolute right to do so in your democracy?
Yeah, again, you're asking a question that, what if my father became a rapist?
I knew you would never answer.
No, that's the point. You're asking a hypothetical, and I'm dealing with facts.
Give me a hypothetical answer.
No, I don't believe in that. You're me this. If my grandmother had wheels, yes, she is. No, I am not.
And every listener out there knows that he is a
right. Very good. But every listener now knows that you've been exposed as a fraud because you base your appeal on a lie. I don't care if the Galilee is more Arab. If the statistic is that only 17% of the state is like this, and Arab birth rate is dropping, and the Arab population on the West Bank is actually either in decline or total status quo because of Arab emigration. That is not a lie. It's from Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Israeli ambassador to the UN, presumably a liar like all those who oppose you.
No. What is true is that the Arabs who left the West Bank left to work in Kuwait and in Arabia, and have no intention of not coming home. And indeed, this last year, there was a major series of articles in Haaretz which showed that they are coming back because of the lack of jobs in the Gulf states. However, I ask you again, so that the listeners will attempt to get hold of this point. In theory, does your democracy allow for anyone to be the majority of the country, Jew or non-Jew? Yes or no?
In theory, in pure theoretical terms, the Jewish state has a right to remain a Jewish state. Just as during World War II, England suspended certain democratic processes in order. No, not good. The good find nothing.
Then you are.
I am saying to you. Oh my God! Oh, this is perversion.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, on with Rabbi Meir Kahane and Dennis Prager.
Okay. Good morning, gentlemen. I have two questions for Mr. Prager and one for Mr. Kahane. Mr. Kahane, what? Let's just hypothesize that you do come into power and you can implement your policies. How long will it take, with you implementing your policies, how long will it take for the Arabs to mobilize and go to war against you, should that ever happen?
I don't know. I don't know how long it took them to, go to war against Israel in 1948 without Meir Kahane. How long it took them to go to war against Israel in 56 without Kahane. In 67 without Kahane. In 73 without Kahane. The Arabs will, go to war against Israel on the day that they're convinced that they can wipe out Israel with Kahane or without Kahane.
In that I agree with you, sir. I truly agree that they would do that.
That's right. Okay, then that's it.
Yeah, and Mr. Prager.
Yeah.
Okay. If we, I don't know how you believe in terms of the Arabs, but do you believe that the Arabs will take the first, if they have a chance to destroy Israel, will they do that?
Most Arabs would.
Then then from that standpoint alone, you must admit that Mr. Kahane has a reason for doing that, because the Arabs will unite and destroy Israel the first chance they get if they really believe they can succeed.
Yeah, but you see, one of the reasons that it is important to have a Jewish state, it would seem to me, is in order to preserve Judaism. But where the essence of Judaism is to become like their Arab neighbors in their moral outlook, then the only difference between a Kahaneized Israel and an Arafatized Jordan is the language that they speak. So the raison d'etre, the reason for being of Israel, if it's to become a state as morally low as many of its neighbors, strikes me as a bit odd. So I don't understand what one has to do with the other. That Israel can continue to be a light unto the nations as a democratic state in the midst of tyranny is not in any way necessary to have compromised just because you have many of its enemies, and not all. I don't think that Egypt would in fact join in that battle at this time, and everybody to the left of Rabbi Kahane, including the right-wingers in Likud, would generally agree with that. That's why they signed a peace agreement with Egypt.
I think that's probably the most absurd statement that I have heard this evening. Mr. Begin signed it, and Likud went along with it. I sit in the Knesset, And the attacks upon Egypt that I hear from really crude, are just legion. And again, I'm just asking now because I'm not really sure what Mr. Prager means by Judaism, and this is just kind of a personal question. When you say Judaism, is your concept of Judaism, of Torah, do you believe that God literally appeared at Mount Sinai and gave the Torah to the Jewish people? I'm just curious.
There is no Jewish source in any normative Jewish source that believes that God literally appeared. Your anthropomorphic understanding of God is pagan.
Is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the literal word of God? Yes or no? Don't try to evade questions.
I believe that the Torah reflects God's will.
I hope that every single listener out there is getting some kind of an idea of what Dennis Prager is. He won't answer a question. So clearly, therefore...
Why is that not an answer to a question? I believe that it reflects God's will. I believe that God...
Jew believes that
God dictated each word exactly as is such to Moses. On that particular issue, I do not know. It is possible yes, possible not, and it is utterly irrelevant to your distortion of it, which is why no reputable rabbi...
Don't be defensive.
You are defensive. You're the one who should be defensive.
But I'm not defensive.
You have been called a fraud Jewishly, and people should know that.
But that doesn't bother me. You see,
whether it bothers you or not, and I answered you. Look, Sam is bothered. He's holding on the line here from Reno.
Now, therefore, if you're not sure that God did give the Torah, He did give the Torah.
No, I didn't say that. I said that I wasn't sure that God dictated every single word